Now look, I get it, these are very different vehicles, okay? The Model Y is a crossover SUV, and the Cybertruck is, of course, one of the weirdest looking pickup trucks we've ever seen, but there's a lot of people probably out in the market right now that are debating whether or not they want to pick up their first Tesla or maybe their second Tesla, and they're quite not sure to whether or not they want to get something very sporty and kind of traditional in design with the Model Y. Still very good looking car, fairly practical, lots of cargo space, it's got a powered hatchback, or decide if they want to wait for the Cybertruck, which is honestly around the same price point, and get that whole stainless steel exoskeleton, the 6-seater option over the Model Y, which at this point they're only making the 5-seaters. We're probably going to have to wait till 2021 once they start bringing in that 7-seater, which by the way is probably not going to be very roomy. Based on the early access photos we've seen of that third row option for the Model Y, it sounds like it's pretty much only going to work for children or very, very short people, versus the Cybertruck, which when there were test drives done with it, very tall people were getting in that thing and saying that there was still a lot of headroom in the back, which means that, yeah, there is a little third seat in the front row, so you can technically fit 6 people, but at that, very, very comfortably, because these are large seats, and apart from the Tesla Semi, the Cybertruck is going to be the largest vehicle Tesla has produced yet, both when it comes to length, height, and width, as well as cargo space. So, given the fact that you have, obviously, with a pickup truck, a much larger bed, and potentially the option for that garage door style cover to be equipped with solar panels, the Cybertruck has some compelling advantages over the Model Y, one of which being an air suspension system, which means that via the touch display inside the Cybertruck, you'll be able to adjust your ride height depending on what is most comfortable for you. And if you ever wanted to load stuff up into the back of the Cybertruck, that tailgate can convert into a ramp, in which case the adaptive air suspension will lean down to make it a lot easier for you to load up your cyber quad or motorcycles or whatever you happen to be hauling. So the Cybertruck is definitely a practical machine. So if we're just comparing practicality use cases and not really talking about design preference or anything like that, what are the disadvantages to going with the Cybertruck over the Model Y? Seems like the Model Y is basically just a lifted version of the Model 3. We've got some EPA certified range with it, that it can get 315 miles, and that's for the $53,000 configuration, whereas the Cybertruck, its dual motor configuration is listed to be at $50,000, though I'm sure that's probably going to change by the time the Cybertruck actually comes out. I'm anticipating it'll probably be a little bit higher than that, but the range will also likely be much higher than 300 miles. So when it comes to range for price point, I think Cybertruck and Model Y are actually quite close. The biggest disadvantage you have with the Cybertruck, I think, is the obvious one: time. The Cybertruck is not going to be coming out in 2020, whereas the Model Y, I personally feel like there's a good chance that almost every configuration of it will be available by the end of this year. Right now, they're claiming standard range, and they're claiming the 7-seater is not going to be available until 2021, but it's super ahead of schedule. The first deliveries are just next month, and I think they're just trying to be a little bit generous with their timeline so that they can beat expectations. So my personal prediction is that by Q4 of 2020, we'll start seeing the standard range options in 7-seaters, whereas the Cybertruck, even absolutely best case scenario, at the very, very soonest, you're probably not going to get a Cybertruck until 2022 if you haven't reserved one yet. If you have a reservation and you slap down that $100 as soon as you saw Franz crack that glass on stage, then you may have a decent chance of getting one at the end of 2021. I made a video earlier about whether or not the Cybertruck could arrive early. I think there's potential for it, but I personally don't think it will be as ahead of schedule as the Model Y was because it's such a drastically new design. I do personally think it will come early. I'm estimating around July or August of next year. But again, that's for the very, very earliest of people. That's for those of you who reserved the dual motor and the triple motor options. And if you haven't reserved one yet and you're still on the fence of what you want your next Tesla to be, I personally think that so many people are on board with this design. There's so many reservations already. Way more than I think Tesla got for the Model Y, because when they first unveiled the Model Y, reservation cost $2,500 a piece, whereas the Cybertruck, it was only $100 a piece. And between the practicality and the utility of it and the drastic redesign, the Cybertruck broke the internet way more so than the Tesla Model Y did. So that's why I think if you haven't reserved one yet and you're thinking about reserving one, if you did it today, right while watching this video, you probably would not be able to get your hands on one until well into 2022. So you're talking about a couple years out if you decide the Cybertruck is a better use of your money than the Model Y. But that's not to say time is the only enemy of the Model Y, because I think it's important to address the aesthetics and the statements you're kind of making when driving around a Cybertruck versus a Model Y. You know, when they first started testing driving the Tesla Model Y on public roads, people with trained eyes could point them out because, you know, it's easy for them to blend in the general public. If someone wasn't following the tech space very much or watching much Tesla news, they would see a Model Y prototype drive right by them and wouldn't think anything of it. They just think, oh, that looks like a typical Tesla. But people who are in the community and those who know exactly what to look for with the Model Y, they would see it, freak out, take pictures, go live, insult the driver. You know, all that stuff happened. But the Cybertruck, that thing's basically making a statement everywhere you drive that thing. This thing is going to turn heads everywhere they take it. It's not going to be something that can fly easily under the radar, despite it being somewhat inspired by the F-117 stealth fighter. But no, anytime this thing shows up on public streets, everyone's going to be looking at it, and I don't mean that in a necessarily positive way. Sure, there's a lot of you online that enjoyed the design and think it looks very unique and cool, but there's definitely a lot of you out there that hate the look of the Cybertruck, and I'm sure the general public is probably pretty tossed on it too. So I guarantee you there's a ton of people out there that are totally on board with the utility of it, but just can't get past that design, and they probably don't want to have to start a conversation or make a statement everywhere they drive their pickup truck. You know, they just want it to work. They don't need everyone looking at them or honking at them, or people rolling down their windows at intersections saying, hey, what the heck are you driving? The Model Y fits perfectly into today's general car, you know, aesthetic. No one's really going to shout from across the street or look again whenever they see a Model Y drive by. It's a good looking car, but it's nothing too out of the ordinary. Whereas the Cybertruck, it's going to be impossible for people to not stop and look at this thing whenever it's driving around. So the looks of a car actually do play quite a major role in whether or not people decide if it's worth it. So I totally get it. If you think the Cybertruck looks kind of weird and you don't want to deal with that reaction from the general public, or you don't want to see yourself in this thing, that's a pretty good argument as to why maybe waiting the 2 years is not worth it. And just, if you want a practical, you know, utility-based electric car, Model Y is going to be a great option. It's got decent range, it's got great autopilot and full self-driving capability. It's the safe way to go, in other words. You know, I think that by the end of this year, I'm pretty sure Model Y deliveries will be pretty quick, probably down to a month or two by the end of 2020, whereas Cybertruck, I genuinely feel like it's going to take years and years before they're actually able to keep up with demand for this thing. And another important factor that I think is important to remember is that the Cybertruck is probably going to be a little bit more tricky to drive given it's such a large vehicle and you sit up so high off the ground and you're driving around this huge chunk of metal. Looking around corners and making sure that there's a parking space that can fit you is probably going to be a lot more difficult with a large vehicle like this compared to the Model Y, which is by no means a compact vehicle, but it's definitely going to be much more manageable in tight spaces. If you have a small garage or the parking space at your job is somewhat small, it can be much more convenient and comfortable to have a vehicle that doesn't take up a gargantuan amount of space everywhere you take it, and that's why the Model Y could easily be the right choice for a lot of people. So obviously there's no right answer because you know your use case better than I do. Personally, I think people who don't really care too much about the size of the vehicle and want something as big as possible, and also want something to be as functional as possible and don't really care too much about the looks, waiting for the Cybertruck in the long run might end up really being worth it to some of you, because having solar power, meaning that you could park it outside and potentially gain like 15 miles of range a day, is a huge cost savings factor over the Model Y. Not to mention Cybertruck comes with a 6-seater configuration standard, whereas the Model Y, you have to spend an extra $3,000 in order to get that 7-seater, and those 2 extra seats are going to be quite small, whereas based on the interior shots of the Cybertruck we saw, it looks like you could comfortably fit 6 full-grown adults, even if they're all over 6 feet tall. Yeah, that little mid-seat might be a little uncomfortable, but still, the Cybertruck range is supposed to start at 250 miles, but I also think they're being generous with that. By the time the rear-wheel drive option for the Cybertruck is available, it will likely be much better than that, and same with the Model Y. They claim standard range is 230. I'm expecting it to be more like 250 by the time they actually start deliveries, but the adaptive air suspension is definitely a huge help, and being able to tap into an air compressor, the ramp for loading stuff up, having a bed attached to your vehicle is really, really handy, especially if you're moving stuff around a lot, whether it be furniture or helping friends move. But who knows, that could be a negative for some of you, you know? Once you become that guy with the pickup truck, people are going to be asking you for favors all the time. I know because I'm that guy. I have to ask my friend for a pickup truck every time we move something, and luckily he's my dad, so it works out. But yeah, these are all things you should definitely consider in time. But let me know what you guys think is the better option. I know they're very, very different vehicles, so it's kind of stupid to compare pickup trucks to SUVs, but I still think it's a fun exercise given the similarity of their range and price points being the biggest factor when buying an electric vehicle. Most people are considering. But either way, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. So let me know down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have an excellent day. Take care.